Secret Circle.
Welcome to Secret Circle with me, Dr. Luke Decker, the podcast where I chat with authors, filmmakers, musicians, and more about the art of their craft and let you in on some of their secrets. Today's guest is author, journalist, film critic, reverend, paranormal expert, and more, Peter Laws, and today he's going to let you in on some of his spooky secrets. Welcome, Peter, to the show.
I feel like I should have burst out of a coffin or something.
God, that would have been great. That would have been top quality production right there.
Yeah.
So welcome to the show, Peter.
Hello.
I've for a while been meaning to reach out to you and ask you to come on the show, and so it was really quite fun that I ran into you the other day at my local Waterstones, which
that was random.
That was the one time in Waterstones where I ran into like 3 people or so that I knew, and I'm like, I've never been in here with more than one person that I've ever known. It's like that was the time to be there.
Yeah,
it was fate. So anyway, glad to have you on. One of the first questions I always ask the creatives that come on the show is, why do they do their art? So you have a lot of different avenues, but you're also a writer, and I'm very interested in why the philosophical question of why you write. So whether that's paranormal stuff, your crime, paranormal crime books, what is it about writing and storytelling? Why do you feel the need to do it?
That's a good question, and I suppose a way of answering it would be to tell you about a time when I was beginning to start writing, and I wanted to get like books published, and I was on the hunt for an agent. But at that point, I didn't have an agent or book deals. That came later. So at that time, we were in the little group together, and all of these writers are talking about how writing was such a passion of theirs, and it is of mine. But we went around the group, and a question was asked. Well, look, if for some reason, like God or the universe or an alien or something came down and said, "Oh, by the way, just so you know, you will never ever be published. Like, do you want to keep doing this?" And it went around the group, and people were going around saying like, I wouldn't stop this. I would keep writing because this is a part of who I am.
Yeah.
And even if it sits in a drawer, I will carry on writing. And it's going around this group, and I'm sitting there thinking like, oh crap, like I'm going to come across as like such a kind of fame-hungry type of kind of aspiring author. But it got to me, and I was like, if I got told by the universe I'd never get published, I'd stop today. and they looked at me like, what? And I said, I would stop doing that. Partly because like my creativity is not just about creating, although that's a huge part of it, but it's about like connecting with people. And so the thought that my creativity never kind of fills that part of the equation would leave me dissatisfied. Yeah. But because I'm I'm a little bit hyperactive when it comes to creativity, because I'm involved in lots of different things, and fiction and nonfiction and music and podcast and speaking and just all sorts of crazy stuff, play loads of different musical instruments, not necessarily amazingly well, but like I've always had that hyperactivity when it comes to creativity. So if I was told no one's ever going to read any of your books, I'd go, oh, well, fine, I'll move on to a different type of creativity. And I don't think that is a sign of, well, maybe it is a sign of kind of self-absorption or wanting to be a people pleaser. I don't really care. It's just part of my DNA that I create things because I love the idea of there's a blank page or blank anything, and then something new comes, and that's a compulsion within me. But the thought that only is in my own orbit leaves me dissatisfied.
I 100% agree with you.
Right.
I do, and I also don't believe any writers who say they do it for themselves. I just don't. I think, as you were saying, we do this stuff because we want people to read it and enjoy it and feel something from it. Like I totally, I'm totally with you on that. I don't think there's any other reason to create art if it's just solely for you. I
think there's also an element of like performance, in the sense like some people do enjoy performance, like they kind of like entertaining people. And I was speaking at an arts conference just about a week and a half ago, and I remember there when we had a panel, and I'd done a talk on whether art should make us feel uncomfortable, and I was like, yes. But we went around the group, and somebody said, the question from the audience was, do you try to manipulate people's emotions with your art?
Mm.
And again, it went down the line, and they were saying like, no, like I just create the art and I hope that people will connect with it. But I'm not trying to manipulate people. And it got to me, and I was like, I'm totally trying to manipulate people's emotions. That's the entire point. Like that, and that's I like doing that. And I remember even when I was a kid, being at school, and I'd be like telling people super scary stories, or saying like, hey, did you know that house is haunted? Or
Yeah.
I've got a feeling there's a werewolf loose in the woods. Did you know this? And it was all to like create an emotional reaction. And
Yeah.
and it's about reaction. It's not just the reaction in me, because I get delighted at the
Yeah.
thought of other people being in the same journey as me. So yeah.
Totally. And again, I 100% agree, because like, if you think about it, think about like you go and see a play and there's an emotional scene. Like the people in the audience aren't, they're not whatever that scene is meant to be. Let's say it's a
Mm,
breakup or a death or something like that. They're not experiencing a death, but you need to make them experience it. So you are trying to
yeah.
manipulate their emotions to get them into that moment.
Mm,
Think about film scores. How many times does
oh,
the score come in to manipulate your emotions, to whether it's like
yeah.
spooky with the eerie minor chords, or uplifting sort of triumphant stuff. Like
Yes.
eh, art is definitely, I mean, maybe manipulation is too harsh a word. I don't know, but there is a sense of evoking emotion, and you're trying to get the audience to feel
Yeah.
something, and you get them there through your art, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I appreciate it could come across as, if you wrote it down on paper, it would be like, oh yeah, technically I'm a manipulative people pleaser. Kind of sounds a bit bad, but I do think like that
Yeah.
is the heart of so much creativity. It's that it's you found, this is the odd thing, where when I hear people who like say write music and or write songs, and with one of my podcasts, I write original songs for that, which is a bit of a wacky show. A kind of a horror church. It's been described as Stephen King meets Songs of Praise, and and I write these really weird songs, but I'm quite willing to listen to those songs back.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily because I'm obsessed with myself, although I'm sure
Yeah.
I am a narcissist in many ways, like I think many of us are.
Mm.
But it's just like I think, well, I have chosen that to fit my tastes.
Yes.
It's like,
Yeah.
I want the sound of the bass to sound like this, or oh, this lyric pleased me. And so to me, I don't know, it feels like I've created something that pleases me, and I hope pleases other people. So I
Yeah.
quite enjoy listening to it.
Yeah.
But I appreciate another person can look in and say, like, wow, you're really up yourself to be driving in the car listening to your own music. But but I have plenty of I have so many failings and doubts, and like I'm total screw up in so many different ways. And I'm not
Yeah.
ashamed to admit that side of things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't have that thing inside me that says, um, you know, keep it to yourself, because everyone might hate it.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
But I appreciate other people might do that. One of the reasons why they may not put themselves out there is because they're worried about what people might think. And I really
yeah.
respect and understand that sense of kind of insecurity.
Yes.
That's a real
Yeah.
thing.
It is, and because obviously the insecurity can really that can knock people down. I mean, I've known many artists who, when they are reading their bad reviews, or the response isn't what they were hoping for, it can really send the artist into a spiral, because
Yeah.
it does feel like disliking the art can also feel like disliking you as a person, and then make you feel, you
Yeah.
know, like a failure of some kind.
Yeah,
You know?
and I think maybe it could have something to do, not to go into too deep psychology, but with your kind of upbringing, your parents, or how
Yeah.
you were spoken to by authority figures. But certainly, I know that, like for example, I was the first person in my entire family who even stayed on for A levels, never mind go to university. And
Right.
my mom, like when I would come home and I'd say to my mom, "Hey, mom, I got an F in French today," and there would have been some parents who maybe understandably would have went, F. It's a bit or like you could like maybe work harder, but my mum would be like, wow, you got an F in French, you're learning French, oh my goodness, the circles you move in, that's amazing, wow, I could never learn French. And there was just this sense of
Yeah.
Like, wow, well done, well
Yeah.
done. And I think maybe I have internalized that, whereas other people might internalize the opposite. Like, you only got an F. That's a bit crap.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. How you respond to the then it's something you think you'll also learn as an artist along the way is learning to respond to the negativity of things and finding ways to kind of put those shields up. I think is easier said than done. Um,
Yeah, and also this sort of stuff, it does, whether you've been told by people, "Hey, you're great,
yeah.
the stuff you make's good," or the opposite. In a way, none of that really matters a great deal when it comes to trying to get published or get. I remember like the
Yes.
times when I was waiting to get published. There were times when I was like, "Oh my goodness, like another rejection." I'm sitting there in the kitchen, starting to cry over
Yes.
this letter and going like, "Man," but I suppose the difference for me is I never thought this is happening because I'm crap.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a big blessing because many people will think, oh well, obviously I'm just rubbish. I
Yes.
just was like, this is not the right time, or this is, maybe I'm not going to ever get this opportunity. But it never, but it still made me really sad.
Yes.
But it was a different type of sad. It wasn't a sad of kind of, woe is
Yes.
me. I'm the baddie here.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah. I totally relate to that. Like, yeah, it's learning to not kind of internalize the rejection, I think is really important.
Yeah, and hard, and it can
It
take
is.
a lifetime to kind of deprogram those
Yes.
things.
Yes.
Because
Because the
because if
agent
you
hunt go on, go on.
so I was just gonna say, because the opposite of being, the people who are told, like, you're not very good when they're growing up can end up striving for, like, greatness and do really well. The
Yeah.
opposite is, like, it sounds great to me that a parent is saying, "Hey, you're great, well done," but that can sow a feeling of kinda, uh, expectancy. "Oh, well,
Yeah.
clearly my
Yeah.
book's going to be amazing." I'm not saying I always think that, but I'm just saying you have this kind of confidence in you. And
Yeah.
then when your book doesn't necessarily like end up as a Netflix series or something, oh, I kind of thought that was going to happen. Uh,
Yes.
so there's a
Yeah.
different levels. It sounds like arrogance, and it's just not. It's a kind of, I do think it's just it's a DNA thing, like sewn into you. And
Yeah.
maybe after, and once you get a lot of rejections like I did, it does start to push at that a bit, for sure.
How many how do you know the number of how many rejections you had? Is this for your first, Hunter book?
Yeah, yeah, I can't remember how many,
Mm.
kind of gave up counting, but as I did always remember when I was getting all the rejections at first, I there was, like, X Factor and all that sort of stuff's, like, always on TV, and I remember thinking, "Do I wanna be, like, an X Factor contestant
Mm.
who, basically no one's heard of, and then they start at X Factor, and then that Christmas they have the Christmas number 1,
Yes.
or would I rather be one of these, like, cool bands who, like, works the club circuit, gradually grows, and I'm like, "Well, actually, I'd rather be that."
Yes.
Uh, and so I would rationalize my rejections that way. But
That's
then after
I
after
like that.
after a while, I'm like, so I mean, how it worked with me is I wrote a fiction book, and I got an agent quite quickly with that,
Mm.
and that didn't help because I thought, well, hey, I've been told it's hard to get an agent, harder than getting a publishing deal. So I
Yes.
assumed like the next bit was going to be easy, and it wasn't. And eventually, it turned out, I actually moved agents after that.
Ah.
And then the second, I tried to write another book, another novel, just said, "Oh, well, forget that one. I'll do
Mhm.
a new one." And when that struggled a bit, I said to my agent, "Well, okay, I guess this is never going to work out. I'll do a nonfiction book." So I asked her, well, I put together a proposal for a nonfiction book, and she was like, "Cool, we'll send this out." Um, and then amazingly, I got a 2-book deal for fiction. And then
Ah.
about like a month or 2 later, the backup nonfiction crazy idea that I had came through as well.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I got a deal for nonfiction, which
Yeah.
is this book.
Yes.
And it just meant that I had to write a novel and a nonfiction book in the same year, which
Wow.
was a bit hectic, especially when that book took me to kind of Transylvania and Rome and having loads of crazy adventures.
Yeah.
But yeah, whenever I talk to someone who is doing any sort of creativity, but particularly writing. I'm
Yeah.
just like, wow, man, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's
It
tough
is.
out there.
It is. I feel like the writing world is I don't know if I'm just saying this because it's the one that I'm in the most, but like it does feel like this one is really one of the harsher arts to sort of be in and
Mm,
make a way in and get somewhere with because yeah, it's tough going. It's
yeah,
tough going.
it is. But I would say, and if anyone, the people who are watching this or
Mm,
listening to this, and they're writing, I would say, like, be encouraged
mm,
because, like, the journey, not to sound too Oprah Winfrey about it, but the journey is a noble art. You are
yeah,
doing a noble thing. You
yeah,
are saying, I've got creativity and I want to create something new. Um, and whether or not it gets published or not, yeah, that is important. But like the fact that you're trying is
yeah,
just, I think, is so meaningful, and I just get so proud of anyone who does it.
yeah.
Uh, in some ways, especially the people who do it and never get published,
Yes.
because I do remember the first time I started writing for magazines. I wrote a monthly magazine column, but about like 12 or 13 years ago, I'd never written in a magazine. And I
Mm,
remember being at parties and I would like maybe meet someone who writes for like What Car magazine or something. And I'd be like, I don't know anything about cars, but just the thought that they were published in a magazine that people
yeah,
paid money for. I was just in awe of these people. I thought, gosh, man, imagine being like a person like that.
yeah.
And then in time, I got my first article published in a magazine, and my family it's a bit sad. My family, we all went into Sainsbury's to the newsagent part, and then I pick it up off the shelf, and I'm like, oh my goodness, there's a photograph of me, and I'm standing like a total dork, holding this magazine while my family take pictures. But I had a really profound moment when that happened, because as I was holding the magazine, I noticed like everyone else in the shop was totally walking past, and I thought, most of these people are not gonna buy this magazine. They're not gonna read it.
Yeah,
And it was actually really liberating. It
yeah,
suddenly made me think, hang on a minute, the people who write for magazines or books or anything, it is kind of just a job.
yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily have to change the world. And it's almost like the mystique of it. Once you get it,
Mm,
the the mystique is still there a bit, but it kind of diminishes to a realistic level. But
yes,
when you
yeah,
don't have it, it becomes like this kind of golden calf, this like idol of like this. I
yes,
have to have this, and my
yes,
life will be complete. It's a little bit
yes.
like Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. They in interviews they talk about how they're so glad that they won their Oscar early for Good Will Hunting,
Mm,
because when that happened, they realized, oh, I don't have to strive for that
yeah,
for the rest
yes,
of my career, because actually it's just a thing. It's
yes,
nice, but it's
yeah,
just a thing. So yeah, it's quite liberating being published, in the sense that it liberates you from the obsession that that's all that matters, because it's not all that matters.
yeah. I totally agree. And again, it's like that. Managing expectation is also very complicated, I think, because I can't tell you how many times you will see the publication day blues, as they call it, where your book is out that day, your article's out that day,
Yeah.
and you're like, wait, where's the? I thought I was gonna wake up to fanfare and sales going off the charts, and
Yeah.
oh, it's like just another day.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I do love the publication day
Mm,
feeling, but
yeah,
you're totally right. Once that day is gone, it's like, oh, okay, that's that then.
guess I'll go get a coffee.
Yeah.
um, okay, so I'm interested because there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about. I'm also interested in some of your early literary influences because you're big
Mm.
into horror, paranormal stuff. Was that
Yeah.
a big influence as a kid? Did that come later? What was the stuff that you grew up on?
I think the interest kind of just was naturally in me, and so the beginning interest would have literally been noticing how when people at school talked about football, I kind of glazed over, and then if someone said there was a haunted house, I would suddenly come alive.
Yep,
I'd be like, what's going on here? And I think
heartbeat.
I had this kind of. Interestingly, it is. I do think it's related to my kind of spiritual openness, in the
Mm,
sense that I just had this feeling. I'm not convinced that the world is as as black and white and as kind of simplistic as
Mm.
some people are telling me. I've got a feeling like there's something just beyond the veil, you
Yeah.
know? And
Yeah.
for me, religion wasn't an example of that, because that just seemed really boring and also
Mm.
restrictive on my personality. Whereas horror films and ghost stories were a great way of saying, "Oh no, like that you could open up that veil simply by, making a Ouija board in woodwork," which I did. At school, I did as a project. I made a Ouija board in woodwork. Um, but yeah, it was those sorts of things that they excited me, not only on a kind of creative level and just an entertainment level, but they had threads of
Mm.
really quite deep and profound ideas. I
Mhm.
was scared of death. I still am scared
Yeah.
of and disturbed by death. Um, it's a bit weird if people are like, "Yeah, I'm totally fine with death."
Yeah, I'm like, "No, you're not."
It's like, wow, like, only serial killers say that stuff. Only kidding, only kidding. But no, so there's a lot of profound things going on
Mm.
with our interest in dark stuff. I mean, sorry, I lift that book up again as a blatant
Yeah, yeah,
plug,
yeah.
but I mean that's specifically what this book is about. Why we love monsters, ghosts, death, and gore. It's called The Frighteners.
Yeah.
But yeah, those stories and those things meant something to me on
Mm.
an entertainment level, and also in a kind of profound philosophical level.
Yeah. Yeah. I it is interesting to me that your sort of journey where it sort of begins with the paranormal and then eventually kind of religion comes into it. Well, God
Yeah,
comes into it.
yeah.
Um I grew up in in Midwest America, Christian background, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I've always also been fascinated by the paranormal, and it's
Mm,
interesting because those two things don't always sort of go hand in hand. They can be quite they can kind of clash quite a bit. So
yeah.
I'm interested in sort of what was it. Was there something particular about your early experience with religion and stuff like that was putting you off from it the most?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I liken it to a book I love and a film I love by Ira Levin called The Stepford Wives.
Yeah.
Not the John Landis remake, that was a bit ropey, but the original in the 70s with
Yes.
Catherine Ross in the lead. And I always related to that book because it was basically saying, oh, as a woman, if you if you want to be a woman, you need to be this type of person.
Yeah.
And it totally ignored the women who were like, I don't want to be a housewife. I want to be a photographer.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to be, you know, looking after my husband and my children. I have other things I'd like to do. And the thought that I can only be an authentic woman by being that. And that appealed to me in the sense that I was like, I want to be an authentic person.
Yeah.
And I get quite claustrophobic, like psychologically, I suppose, that the thought that I'm being boxed in.
Mm.
And I just, whenever I even entertained the idea of church, I never went to church. I didn't go to church growing up.
Mm.
So I didn't have a lot of experience of actual Christians. But
Mm.
when I watched them on TV, um, which was my only kind of resource, or at school,
Sure.
the RE teacher, for example, I used to give her quite a hard time. Uh, I was saying, oh, hang on, you're not presenting to me a religious worldview alone. You're presenting to me a religious worldview and a cultural
Mm.
expression of that worldview that I must accept
Mhm.
to qualify for the religious worldview. Because
Yeah.
I was like, well, I'm not totally against the idea of there being an afterlife and God. I'm kind of it's kind of intriguing. But if
Mm.
it turns out that God is the character who says, "Oh, but you can't watch The Evil Dead," do you know what I mean? Or Dungeons and Dragons is going to
Yeah.
send you to hell, and it's like, what? Like, why
Yes.
would I want to hang out with someone like that? Especially when I see a really positive magic in those things.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I was just put off religion, whereas the paranormal
Mm.
was, and I've spoken about this before. I work on a show called Uncanny for the BBC,
Mm.
and one of the kind of so-called paranormal experts, and that's been hugely popular.
Yeah.
And I do think one of the reasons why it's so popular is the paranormal in ever since kind of 2004 time up until now has exploded in popularity. And I do think it's in some ways a kind of new religious movement
Mm.
because it is providing people, particularly kind of younger people, an opportunity to explore the same themes as religion does. Is there
Yeah.
anybody there up there, or is there
Yeah.
anybody there? And also the exploring the ideas of the afterlife and death, and is there something else? There was a
Yeah.
time, about 20 years ago, where it was said, oh, new atheism is going to kind of take over, and everyone's going to be kind of skeptical atheists.
Yeah.
And that still happens. Some of my best friends are skeptical atheists.
Yeah.
But that it has not taken hold of the culture like we
No.
predicted. But
No.
ghosts have grown. And I think that's because they offer a supernatural, paranormal, like enticing view into a spiritual worldview that doesn't make any kind of moral demands on us.
Yeah.
I'm not saying paranormal people aren't moral. That's not what I'm saying. But when you listen to an episode of Uncanny, it's not like at the end of it, it talks about poltergeist, and at the end, Danny Robbins, the presenter, says, now we've heard about a vengeful spirit. Well, maybe that should teach us that this week your boss who's treating you badly, if he's vengeful, maybe you should be kind to him, because we should love our enemies, because this poltergeist didn't, and look what happened. It'd be like, stop moralizing this. That's not what this is about. But if you go to church,
Yes,
that it does feel like that's what it's about. And also, there's no testing. There's no testing in church. You can't suddenly whip out an EMF meter and say, I want to check to see if anything happens when people pray.
Right.
They're like, whoa, don't do that. Whereas our scientific mindset says, no, I want to have actual proof.
Yes.
And
yes.
the paranormal search has all of that baked in. So I think it appeals to people, and I sympathize with that because it appealed to me for those very reasons, and still does.
Yeah, the idea of, and this might be like a bit of a side tangent, but this idea of maybe a new people looking for new religious outlets and finding that elsewhere. It's a phenomenon I think I noticed maybe I guess coming close to 20 years ago now. Particularly thinking about the way in the last maybe say 10 to 15 years. Cinema has become quite cultish in a way, by the extreme fans. Like, you could use an example of the late Chadwick Boseman, who played Black Panther. When he died, the character died, and it's this sort of, we've elevated actor and character into sainthood, and to recast as blasphemy, and how dare you be it's almost like, Marvel can be like the Christianity, and I don't know, DC can be, I don't know, Hinduism. You can't,
Yeah.
but I can, so I feel like there is an interesting desperation in culture today, looking for purpose, looking for meaning in something, and traditional religion or God or Christianity, whatever, those sorts of groups or terms, I think, have been, for a lot of people, they put people off now, and I think people have gravitated towards these other outlets. Which, again, I totally agree with you in terms of the uptick of paranormal stuff. It does seem to be getting more and more. I come across more podcasts, more shows, more books, more everything. And again, like what you were saying about, like, you go to church, what happens when people pray, or people say they see things and stuff like that, and like you want to scientifically explore that, right? But for some reason, like, churchy people are like, no, you can't, because faith is the evidence of things unseen, that sort of thing. And you're like, well, okay, but I want to know, what's, like, is there something going on? Is there not something going on? I want to explore it, and you're sort of kind of put off from that, which I can see almost making a person feel a little annexed out a little bit,
Yeah, totally. And of course, we haven't even mentioned the bigotry and the kind of the prejudice and the kind of what seems to be inbuilt. And it's like, that's why I was always put off religion, and that's in many ways why I'm still put off. I don't really think of myself as a religious person in many ways. I certainly don't call myself an evangelical Christian, because that has so much baggage to it. And it's just I'm not surprised. Why would people want to sign up to something that seems so relentlessly anti-scientific and anti-gay or anti-trans, all these sorts of lists. You
Yes.
could very anti-everything,
Yeah.
not very
Yeah.
pro much stuff. And I must say that, like, even though the stuff I do sounds controversial in the sense that, I am an ordained church minister these days, although, I do most of my work in creativity now, but I'm that while at the same time being into horror and scary things. And you'd think that would be the thing that Christians struggle with the most. But to be honest, I don't get as much kickback about that as I do about that. I'm quite happy if people are gay and want to have a relationship, and I've
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
banned from speaking in some churches because of
Yeah.
that view. So it's ironically that stuff that seems to push more buttons than the fact that I think The Exorcist is great.
The Exorcist is great, and they're real.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's fine, but you can't be gay. Like,
Yeah.
it's do you get more pushback from British audiences or American audiences? Just out of curiosity.
Probably
Yeah.
American, I think. Although, like in America, most of the and I have a fairly kind of biggish audience in America in the sense that, like, my podcast Frightful, which
Yes.
explores like scary true stories, is I think it's like top 1% global podcasts, which sounds great. I don't fully know exactly what it means, but it still sounds great. But it is popular enough to get adverts and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But that's just about scary stuff. There's no kind of religious element of that whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if as many people in America are aware of that side of me.
Right.
Whereas, like,
Right.
Uncanny that I work on, that's clearly, well, like, I'm introduced as like the Reverend Peter Laws, which makes me feel all like a bit cringy and stuff, because those sorts of words feel weird to me. Like, I don't have a dog collar. I'd never want. The only
Yeah.
time I wore one was from like a magazine shoot thing, where I had to like stand with a crucifix, in front of a stained glass window, and I had to make a dog collar. I was like, well, what am I going to do? I'll get I don't know, get it. I've got a black shirt, sheet of A4 paper, fold it up into a strip,
Brilliant.
somehow stick it around there. But yeah, I'm my religious outlook is frustratingly vague, I suppose. For me, Christianity really has been a very meaningful experience and a life-changing experience. But I don't therefore see that I am the guy who's discovered the gold, and all of
Right.
you horrible, like, sinners in the darkness need me to swoop in. And I do get worried about that sometimes, that people think that this is some sort of cynical thing, that, oh, hang on, you're interested in the paranormal because ultimately you're trying to swing into our dark cave and kind of scoop us up and rescue us from Satan. And I'm
Right.
like, no, I'm still legitimately into this stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also, I want to learn from you, Chris. Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there
Yeah.
is no God. Like,
Yeah.
I'm very open to all of these things. But some people find that weird. I'm
Yeah.
not a dualistic thinking person.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's possible to have like two opinions at the same time and
Totally.
not have to choose.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's kind of what I'm like. But my feet point in a certain direction, but I'm still
Sure.
not.
Yeah.
I want to be open.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I remember, like, again, I said I grew up in the Midwest America. It was very sort of conservative Christian world. And what really opened my eyes was going to uni. I studied theology at
Yeah.
University of Manchester. It was great. I saw people have their faith crumbled within the first week and literally run out of class because they couldn't handle what the
Oh,
lecturers were telling them.
yeah, yeah,
you know, um, and that whole experience for me was kind of what you were saying. It's like you can have multiple points of view, multiple thoughts. Not necessarily something you thought you believed in can actually be you might not anymore, and that's fine. And also I felt the whole way in which sort of theology was being taught, from not necessarily from this perspective of like the way like a church might teach it as unquestionable fact. The fact that it was
mm,
being taught as something that's like, more philosophical, and here's what people did, here's what does this mean, if this is true, if it's not
yeah,
true. And I think that's a very interesting way of sort of approaching religion. I do wish more people did that on a more regular basis within all the different religions and their communities,
yeah.
because
Me
yeah,
too. But I would say entire all culture has become more
yeah,
tribal,
totally,
and so this is so having a dualistic worldview on certain things isn't very popular because well,
Pick
particularly
a
like
lane.
yeah, exactly. It's like you have to choose on all of these different subjects, and I
Yes,
get it's you do have to like make decisions. You know,
sure.
you can't be totally dualistic if you're like running a government, for example. You have to choose where money goes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But you know, particularly with social media, which I'm a fan of, but it does kind of force you into choosing
Yes.
certain positions on certain topics when there can be like nuance, but
Totally.
some people don't feel able to say I'm not sure because
Yeah.
they'll instantly be well that means you must be agree with the other side.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, it's gray thinking is something that ironically people might think you start your life gray in your thoughts, and then eventually you reach maturity and you're black and white, and because you know all the answers. I
Yeah.
do think it actually probably works the other way, in that when you're
Yeah.
born, you grow up, you do need black and white thinking to try and kind of figure
Mm.
out how the world works. Don't talk to strangers, they
Yeah.
might kill you in the woods. So actually that's probably quite good to know that.
Yeah.
But then you grow up and you start actually some strangers are very nice. And it becomes more gray. To
Yes.
me, I think grayer thinking can be a sign of, I think, even spiritual maturity or
Mm.
maturity, but
Yeah.
but you know, decisions still have to be made. So
They do. I'm with you. I think yeah, there's certain things like you're saying, governmental stuff. Maybe you have to pick a lane. I kind of get that.
mm,
You can't always be straddling two lanes, and it's
mm,
tricky. But I think on this sort of topic, I think there's a lot of scope for for kind of balancing between multiple thoughts with
yeah.
different spiritual religious sort of topics, I think.
Yeah, but that
Yeah.
doesn't happen that much when we curate
Sure.
communities and
Yeah.
kind of banish and ban who we don't agree with. And don't get me wrong, like I've blocked a few people when I'm like, oh man, I can't deal with this person anymore. They're so odious to me, the things they're saying.
Yes.
But weirdly,
Totally.
I don't know about you, but I have this weird thing. Like I have an attraction to the scary, dark things in life.
Yes.
Um, and I have a weird morbid attraction to people who have opinions that I find abhorrent.
Yeah. Oh,
It's
yeah.
so weird. It's like I don't know if you call it like hate following but I don't. But yeah, I'll sometimes like on YouTube. I just love YouTube. It's like my TV really. Um,
Yes.
you know, I'll just go like I don't want to necessarily watch like an hour of a guy who says everything I agree with.
Right.
I find it much more entertaining and interesting to watch someone who I'm sitting there going, I don't, that's shocking. I can't believe this person.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's something weird about the attraction to the darker things.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm gonna assume that one of the reasons you might be doing that, because I do the same thing, and one of my favorite authors, for example, is a crime writer from the 80s and 90s named Robert B. Parker. He wrote the Spencer
Oh,
series, if you've
all
ever
right.
read it, the really, really great Boston set crime series. Um, the protagonist Spencer is very, very middle politically. He's kind of apolitical.
Mhm.
He's not one side or another. And every book he's either coming into contact with far left or far right
Oh,
wackadoos,
okay.
and it's great. And sometimes they become friends, sometimes they end up being the nasty villain. And I find that quite fascinating, because it's like, the author, he's unfortunately dead, died 2011, I think.
All right.
But he explored interesting things about, the clash of thought and opinion in politics and religion, and I think that's why I
Yeah.
like watching some of these weirdos on social media, probably like you, because it sort of lets us explore this weird stuff, and then we process it, and maybe sometimes let it come out through
Mm.
through our art, which
Yeah. And I think that's weird. Like that's why sometimes I've certainly had some Christians struggle with reading my novels, for example.
yes, we'll talk about that.
This is one of the first ones. Well, not
Yeah.
one of the first ones. It's the first one. I didn't have
Yes.
multiple first ones. Called Purged. But the
Perfect.
character in these books is called Matt Hunter, and
Mm,
he's a kind of atheist professor, but an ex-church minister turned atheist professor who helps the
yeah.
police basically kind of catch evangelical Christian psychopath serial killers, that sort of stuff, or weird occultists and stuff like that.
Yes.
And in the first book, he's on the trail of a Christian serial killer who believes the best thing he can do for people is to baptize them as adults and then murder them immediately afterwards so that they don't lose their faith. Because it would be better to fast track them to heaven.
Right.
And there is a logic to that. There's a logic in the sense of, if you baptize an infant, for example, if that infant is perfect then and destined for heaven, wouldn't it be kinder to kind of execute them then, rather than give them 70 years of life on earth and then be cast into eternal damnation,
right?
Getting prodded in the backside by pitchforks. It's taking I think maybe the ridiculously black and white approach to these sorts of topics and putting it into a story. But Christians have sometimes struggled because they're like, hang on a minute, your lead character's an atheist. And you're like, so I guess at some point, book 7, he's gonna find God. I'm like, no. He's probably he'll be encountering weird supernatural stuff, but the trajectory is not to change that. And he's different to me, but he's the same as me. It's and this is where and also the killers in my books. When I'm writing them, I start developing a weird sense of empathy towards them. I don't agree with what they're doing, but I'm like, hang on, people don't. I'm not keen on just saying someone's evil.
Right.
Not when they can have different brain makeup than me, or imagine if you didn't have empathy. What would you be capable of? I have a lot of empathy, so I don't kill anyone. But is that because I'm a great person, or is it because I'm lucky enough to have been born with empathy?
Yeah.
I'm not excusing killers by any stretch, and still put them in
not
prison.
An endorsement of killing.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it depends who you kill, I suppose. No, of course not. Yeah.
Go back in time. Can you kill baby Hitler?
Yeah. I think I'd wait till he's teenager, maybe. I feel a bit bad about that.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
So with your Matt Hunter series, I really like the angle that you went with the ex-minister turned atheist. I think that's really fun. I'm curious as to kind of your thought process and how this sort of character and this sort of world came to you. What was the creating process like? Was it some of it intentional? What was intentional? What was unintentional with some of this?
Part of it is to do with maybe earlier, my paranoia about the thought that I think people are going to assume that I'm trying to convert them, because I always assumed religious people, that's all they were interested in. They didn't care about me. They just wanted to kind of have another spiritual scalp.
Yeah.
And I just thought I want to write books that explore the paranormal, but also issues to do with religion, because I think religion is quite scary. Yeah. And so it's a good fertile ground to explore those things. But I thought, if I make this guy have any religious aspect whatsoever, it's going to really look like I'm trying to push the agenda of faith or Christianity. And I'm like, I really don't want to do that. So how do I make that not happen? I'm like, I know, I'll make him absolutely despise Christians.
Yeah.
And allow him to say things that are offensive and shocking, and not change him.
Yeah.
And hopefully let people like him, even if they've got faith. So it was kind of that reason, I think, to kind of protect myself from the accusation that I was trying to convert, because that's not totally what I'm into. I'm interested in these topics, and I like to have people get murdered in the midst of discussing those topics.
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that. When you like to see people get murdered in your books?
I meant while I'm typing. I've got this guy who comes in, I'm typing, and he's just hammering.
He's just doing it for me. All right, now do this.
Yeah, just come over. I can't quite see. Yeah,
that's a very unique writing process. That's one that hasn't come.
It's very
on
expensive.
My podcast
I tell you, it's incredibly expensive.
But actually, I am also curious about the legitimate process of
I'm joking, by the way.
This is a joke podcast. Don't worry. These are all jokes. It's
Mm.
fine. It's fine. This will just be an explicit episode for
Yeah.
morbid jokes.
Yes.
Morbid
Yeah.
jokes. I might just title it that.
Yeah,
Explicit
yeah,
episode for morbid jokes.
yeah.
With Peter Laws. Um, but yeah, I'm curious as to your writing process. You're sitting down to write a Matthew, because a Matt Hunter book versus the Frighteners. I mean, that's a very different sort of headspace and how you
Yeah.
approach those sorts of things. But I guess a lot of people who are listening might be more fiction focused. So I'm interested in
Mm.
your process when you're going to write, a fiction narrative, a Hunter book,
Okay.
or whatnot.
Well, I mean, firstly, the thing I would say about writing fiction, anything, but particularly fiction, I suppose, is to me, you there's no excuse to not just write. I know that sounds a bit weird, but like I don't allow myself to do that. So
Mm,
because I'm able to sort of see it as just a task,
mm,
and I try not to. I do think it's a magical, wonderful thing, but I try to
mm,
kind of brew it down to. But ultimately, it's just me tapping and words appearing,
yeah.
and so I can't like romanticize it too much. And so if I called the plumber to fix a leaky tap, and he or she came up the stairs and was like, you know what, I'm not feeling the vibe today. I'll come back maybe in 2 weeks' time after I've gone on a retreat about plumbing to
Yeah.
try and inspire me to plumb again. I mean, I respect that, but I'd be like, I'm not hiring that plumber again.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, I've tried to kind of tell myself, inspiration is irrelevant.
Mm,
Like I
yeah.
have to do this today.
Yeah.
And my wife sometimes would find this hard to get her head around, because when I didn't have deadlines and I was trying to get published, she would be like, why are you kind of working so hard on getting this book finished when there's no deadline? And I'm like, yeah, but there's a kind of fictional boss in my head
Yeah.
who's saying there's a deadline. And I'd be like, I want to please this fictional boss, so I'm going to finish it 1 month before the deadline. It's
Yes.
so weird,
Yeah.
but I just find if I don't do that, if I sit down and I say I'm not feeling it, I just stop. Um,
Yeah.
and I once met the writer Brian Clements, who he's passed away now, but he wrote a TV writer. He created a TV show called The Professionals and The New Avengers, and loads of kind of cool, scary kind of 70s horror movies and TV shows. And his secret to writing was simply arse to chair, pen to paper. That was it.
I like that.
I do find that quite inspiring. And I do, if you get in that zone, I find that stuff happens.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm with you. I'm totally with you on the non-romanticized aspect of writing process. The idea of muse and all that kind of stuff. That I find that a total it's
Mm.
bullshit. It's bullshit to me. But like yeah, like I always find the serious writers, the ones who not necessarily the ones who like as you were saying earlier, like that make it as in like get published or whatnot, but the ones who actually take the work seriously and want to get published, they are the ones who they treat it like a job. They're like, I want to write the story.
Mm.
That means I need to sit here. I need to do the work. And like you like give yourself deadlines. I'm the same.
Yeah.
I can't work deadline less. That just seems like free
Mm.
fall, and it's too much chaos for me. It's too much
Yeah.
chaos.
But the actual writing process itself, though, I'm also I kind of try to create a sort of virtual reality environment in which I'm writing.
Mm,
It's a little bit ritualistic, but I'll have I'll have like film scores playing, like really kind of scary ones often.
nice.
Nothing with sound, nothing with their lyrics, sorry, but I'll have
Yes.
stuff with music, and then I have like loads of kind of apps that will create soundscapes of. So
Yeah.
all right, I'm writing something in a storm covered park.
Mhm.
Right, I'll put on the sound of some kids in the distance, and I'll put on the sound of a storm, and I've just got all this like multi stuff going on. Got
That's
like
cool.
got three screens in front of me here, and I might actually have the videos going on next to me, which I appreciate. It's very excessive. And then if I maybe put headphones on, and I just find myself, it is like I'm quite into VR and playing
Mm,
video games and virtual reality. It is like that, and then sometimes I will come up for air and go like, oh yeah,
yeah.
I'm not there.
Yeah.
I used to do loads of my writing. I think the first two books I would always go out to coffee shops and write, which I really enjoyed. Got a bit expensive after a while, but unless you go to IKEA coffee shop where you can
There you go.
you have a cup of tea, get one, and you refill it for the rest of the day. They don't care. But I would go to coffee shops. But then when I wrote my nonfiction, I was going out to coffee shops, and then I was having to look at crime scene photographs, and
Yeah, like
and I was like,
hiding your
oh
screen.
yeah, and I'm like, well, I'm going to be put on some register. I'm going to go home, and then actually I've morphed into home's okay. I can write
Same.
at home.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I used to like going out, but now I don't have 3 screens. I got 2. I'm down, a third sounds great. But
It's great.
2 big screens. It's like, oh, I've got everything right here. This is wonderful. So there's a couple more things I still want to talk about before we have to wrap up. I still want to do some chat about Fright, the podcast Frightful, the
Oh yes.
Creepy Cove Community Church, and things like that. But there's one thing kind of still about books that I want to cover first. Last thing is, I don't know if you recently saw Joyce Carol Oates on Twitter was dogging on or trashing on the new True Detective series with Jodie Foster, because apparently it has a supernatural paranormal bend to it this time around.
Yeah.
I've not seen the show, but her tweet was interesting, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on it. Where she says, True Detective commingling genres of mystery, crime, detection with horror, gothic, surreal. This merging is always to the detriment of the detective story, since a police investigation depends upon scientific principles. Once you introduce the supernatural, the story is in free fall. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I respect her view, and of course, like, there will be many people who would share it. I just don't share that, and the reason is because I am not particularly that attracted to pure crime fiction.
Yeah.
I respect it and stuff, but I one of the reasons why I'm interested in the supernatural is not only because I find it thrilling, but because it has a sense of hope about it. Because it's not relentlessly about death. It's about, yes, there's a death, but maybe there's something else after that. That is very meaningful to me. So if I watch some sort of ITV crime drama about some woman who gets like raped and killed in the woods, and then they go and it's super depressing, and then they solve it in the end or don't solve it, I can find that stuff sometimes a bit too oppressive for me, and I'm kind of like, and I'm just thinking like, oh man, people really do die and have horrible things happen to them. And I watch that stuff, but I find if I watch anything like, say, True Detective with a thread of something else, there's this sense of that's scary. That's giving me the creeps. And it gives me the creeps in the sense of, if I watch something about a serial killer in America and there's no supernatural element, I'm not really thinking that serial killer is going to come and get me in my house. But if there's a supernatural element, I feel like that's global. And so, hey, that could affect me. It's like when I first watched the Blair Witch Project at home, I remember switching all the lights off in the house, put the Blair Witch Project on, and made sure that I kept the back door wide open while I was watching, just to give the potential of something creeping into the house.
Amazing.
It's because I thought, I've heard this film's really scary. I want to up the ante of the scares.
Yes.
But there's that, for me, I guess what she's saying is it takes away from it being pure crime fiction. And maybe she's right. But some people don't want to be in pure crime fiction. They actually want that fusion. So it's ultimately down to taste.
Yeah. I'm with you on that, because I my first thought was like, has she never seen X-Files? Like, that's I think X-Files proves you're wrong. I'm sorry, Joyce. But the thing is, like, X-Files, even like the first Chucky movie, there's a detective aspect to that movie, because they're trying to chase down the criminal who's inside the doll, and like, it's
I do get what she's saying, in the sense that she's like, oh well, if you want a purely kind of police procedural scientific logic stuff, then it is a bit ridiculous to throw everything open to say, oh, it was a ghost. But it's just some people like that. But this kind of approach did kind of make me struggle at the beginning, because what would happen is publishers would come back and say, we love this book, it's great, but we're not sure how to market it, because we can't tell if it's supernatural horror, if it's crime fiction. And I had a meeting with, I think it was Orion, who were just like, we want to go with this, we love it, it's so good, but the marketing guy, he
Oh,
just can't work out like where would you put it on the shelf. I think
marketing
maybe if
guy's
it
the
came out
word.
right now, maybe it would be different because there's more fusions these days.
Hmm.
But back then there wasn't. I
Yeah.
say
What
back
year did
then
your
it was like
first one come out? I can't remember off the top of my head.
2017. So I've
Interesting.
had 5 books out since 2017. Yeah, that's right.
So that to me, what baffles me about that is I'm thinking of like Ben Aronovich's books, The Rivers of London, which are blatantly fantasy, like crime fantasy, right?
Yeah, yeah, I see what you're saying.
What's the struggle with your, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I never understand the struggle. I always feel like it's marketing people who like want things to fit perfectly into a box, and when it just is like slightly different, they like really lose their mind. And I'm like, it's fine.
Mm.
It's crime fiction with a paranormal slant. It's fine. That's so easy. Done.
Yeah, yeah. I can relate in the sense that, it's a business and stuff. So
Yeah.
it's very specific. But
Yeah.
yes, it can be a struggle. And I did at that time think, oh well, shall I just remove all of the supernatural elements from it? And it is always like it's kind of Scooby Dooey, really, for me.
Yeah.
It's like I love things where you could read these books, and it's very easy to see this is not a supernatural universe.
Yeah.
And that's what Matt thinks.
Yep.
Matt is constantly like the whole struggle is between him saying there is not a supernatural reason for this murder, and then him dealing with all these communities and people who are saying, "Oh no, this is of the devil, or this is
Right.
of a ghost or poltergeist or whatever." And like I think it's possible to have books that can be one or the other,
Totally. Totally.
depending on your worldview. And it helps with me because I
Yeah.
like hey, I'll choose that one today. So
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. All right, let's wrap up with a few questions about
yeah,
podcasting, because as I mentioned earlier, you write you have the Frightful podcast, the
yeah.
Creepy Cove Community Church podcast, Our Curious Past, and you also
Mm,
work on Uncanny. Um, So you got a lot of paranormal podcasting things going on out there. I love paranormal podcast. I listen to them probably the most.
mhm.
It's funny. I listen to paranormal podcasts more than I don't read a lot of paranormal stuff, but I
Yeah.
listen to a lot of paranormal podcasts. So I listen to yours, it's Uncanny. I really like Astonishing
Nice.
Legends as well.
Oh, yeah, they're
Um,
great.
I love them. But I'm curious as to sort of how did you begin your sort of interest into investigating the paranormal through podcasting? What was that journey like, and how did you find your way there?
I mean, I started very early in podcasting
Mm,
in like about 2007, and
mm.
I made the stupid mistake of not starting with a podcast about like what I do now, which is scary stories of the paranormal. If I'd done that, I'd probably like
You'd be
have
the
a really
biggest one
big,
out there.
yeah, exactly, because that would have been so early. I would have gotten in early, but
Yes.
instead back then I'm like, oh no, I think I'll do a podcast about the theological themes in horror movies. Like, what? So
Uh,
looking back there, that was popular-ish, but obviously quite
yes.
niche.
Yeah.
But what happened with me is like my fourth book, where is it? My fourth novel came out, Possessed. About, did you know there's a big increase in people asking for the ritual of exorcism these days?
Mm,
Um, that book's about that, with Matt Hunter in the lead on that
mm.
again. That book came out during the pandemic, you see, and then during the pandemic, I wasn't even in the mood to read a book, never mind write a book.
It's
That
tough.
that wasn't that I was like depressed at all, although it did get a bit hairy at one point. But but no, like during it, I wasn't sad or anything personally, but I just kind of like I just want to read Viz. I don't want
Yeah.
to. I don't want to. I want to watch short videos of people falling over in supermarkets. I don't really want to do anything long. I don't know what that was about. So I
Yeah.
didn't. So I didn't. Not only did I didn't write a book, but then I mean I wasn't contracted to write another book. Don't get me wrong.
Mm,
But my agent was saying, "Hey, go for it." But around that time, I thought, I'm going to hop back into podcasting,
mm,
and so the first podcast I did was Creepy Cove Community Church, and I
mhm.
did that because I noticed that during the pandemic, there was a lot of kind of loneliness
Yeah.
and people feeling isolated at home, whereas the church communities that I was part of, they all had an automatic community because people were coming along and meeting in big groups on Sundays in Zoom meetings. And I just thought, well, what about my friends who don't go to church and wouldn't ever go to that? Why don't I invent a church
Mm,
that isn't based on geography? Because you don't have to be tied to geography. So why don't
yeah.
I create a fictional church based on an area of culture? and I like horror. So I created Creepy Cove Community Church, which is literally, when you listen to it, you're hearing full and immersive church services broadcast from a mysterious fishing town where all horror movies actually happen. And it's kind of mix of comedy, music, and well-being.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and that was great, but it was so niche that you struggled to get funding for that. Although it started a Patreon. If anyone wants to join my Patreon, patreon.com/Peter Laws. But then I started saying, you know what, I need to get a more kind of stable paid podcast gig.
Yeah.
And that's when I applied to write for a supernatural paranormal podcast. And I wrote an episode for them. And they said, we really like this. Would you like to present that script in one of the episodes? And I did that. And they went, you know what, we really like you and the script. So would you like to become the host? And
Awesome.
So I was like, yeah. And so that's how that started. So it wasn't me thinking, I want to explore the paranormal.
Yeah.
Through the medium of podcasting. It was more like I could do with some like more regular money coming in. And then did it that way. But because I love the paranormal, that helped. And then Uncanny came about, I guess. I actually, I'm not fully sure, but I got contacted by the presenter of that, Danny Robbins, to be on the first episode as a paranormal expert, so called. And then I've been in all the seasons ever since.
Yeah.
So these things happen because
it's quite organic. It wasn't like you weren't determined to do it. It just sort of happened.
Yeah, quite organic.
I like that.
Or some could say guided by a supernatural force.
Oh, there we go.
The devil, perhaps.
The thing that it fascinates me with the paranormal stuff is also the idea of, in some ways, there's an element of we are engaging with it to be scared, and I'm curious as to your thought on why do people do that? Like, why does a group of stupid teenagers want to do the Ouija board? You know what I mean? Like, why? What is the draw for us to want to explore these things that are potentially dangerous, potentially harmful, and scary?
Yeah. Well, again, to go back to my book, The Frighteners, but see what a pro I am these days.
I know, it's great.
Because I used to do so many of these, and at the end I go, oh crap, I forgot to mention any of my books. Now I go over the top.
There you go.
But in that book, I mean, that specifically explores that subject and seeks to understand first, like, just really, why does society have a morbid streak? And in the book, I'm trying to defend the fact that it does, and it talks about how it's really quite healthy. And there's all sorts of reasons why people are drawn to the morbid and the scary. A few kind of brushstrokes really would be to say that that when you go through a scary experience with someone, you do get bonded with them. So if you and I got stuck in the lift for like 3 hours, I mean, I don't know how that would go down, but afterwards we'd probably be like really good friends.
Yeah,
because it'd be like, unless you tried to kill me at any point.
He tried to eat my foot.
That's right. Yeah, now he's definitely not my friend. But anyone will know if they've been through like a traumatic experience with other people. Yeah, it does bond you a bit. And ironically, that does kind of happen when you even go through fictionalized versions of fear, because your brain is not quick enough to always understand that what's happening is not real. That's why you leap and scream and freak out. But when people leave the theater after watching a horror film, there's a real sense of like, whoa, that was wild. We did that together. And so it's one of the reasons why the horror community is so strong and so friendly, because people just want to do this together. But there's loads of other reasons. There's in the chapter on children and why I think children should be allowed to explore the morbid and scary. There's a psychology study done on kids whose parents were lost in the Twin Towers, and after that, not long after that, they started building Lego towers and Lego airplanes and smashing them into them one over the other. Wow. And just doing it in a very kind of quiet, predictable, over and over fashion. And understandably, there were people around that saying, this isn't good, this is scary, like these guys are either trivializing these horrible things and turning it into play, or they're fixating on it when really this should be out taking their mind off it or talking to a therapist and explaining how they feel, this is not how you do it.
Mm.
But then child psychologists would come along and say, you leave those children alone. Do you understand what they've been through? They've been through such trauma, and you expect them to have the articulation to be able to put that into words, how they feel. But do you expect them also to live in a world where they pretend it didn't happen?
Yep.
No, they have to take the things that terrify them and acknowledge them, but put them into predictable patterns. And when they do that, they gain a strange sort of mastery over facing their fears and turning it into a weird sort of play. It's not dismissing the morbid nature of it and the horror. It's actually addressing it in a way that we can handle. I think I certainly do that with my stuff. When I write novels about people being killed, it's not because I get excited and rub my knees every time I hear someone's been murdered. It really is the opposite. I get more disturbed by violence and death and murder than I think many people do. And so I take the things that scare me and I put them into patterns. And I think that's what we do as a culture. That's what crime fiction, horror, thrillers do. And so there's lots of reasons, I think, why we are drawn to the morbid and being scared. That's just a couple of them.
Yeah, I love it. I think there's all fascinating reasons for it, and I don't disagree. I also really strongly don't disagree with the idea of um, uh, letting kids sort of explore and understand some of that stuff at a much earlier age. I think it can be quite. I think it can be quite helpful. You
Yeah,
can.
there's a bit in the book where I talk about how have you heard that the bad lip sync video song for Yoda singing about seagulls? I don't know if you've seen it, but
Yes.
it's a really famous internet video. And
Yeah.
when my kids were little, when my son was little, we used to watch that, but then I would like sing it to him in a Yoda voice, which is actually quite disturbing when you think about it. And when I do that sometimes as we're getting ready for bed, and he would be scared. And he would go, stop it, don't talk about Yoda. That's scary. And I go,
Right.
okay, all right, he's freaking out. I won't push it too much. And then I come in an hour later dressed as Yoda. No, I wouldn't. I didn't do that. But I'd go, no, I respect that. But then the next night, he'd say, do that Yoda thing again.
Ah.
And now I had a choice there. And I think some parents would go, no, we won't do that because that gave you a nightmare or that frightened you last night. Can you remember? So let's do a different member of the Muppets or a different member of Star Wars.
Yeah.
I'll be C-3PO. Is that better? But no, I'm of the opinion it's like, wait a minute, this kid has identified something that scares him.
Yes.
And he is now asking for an opportunity to reface it so he can learn courage.
Yeah.
And I'm like, back into Yoda again. Stop. But every night, and that's what these stories do. There are arenas in which we can like face the things that we're frightened of. And to think for kids, and I'd say all society, that we should somehow ban these things because they make us feel uncomfortable is missing the entire point of what they're there for.
Totally.
So yeah.
Totally. I agree. And on that, we'll wrap this up. But Peter, I had a lot of fun chatting about paranormal, religion, horror, books. This was good fun. For anyone listening, there will be links to your website and your Amazon page where people can go buy all of your books, from your fiction books to your nonfiction books. But just quickly, where can people find you on social media?
If you go to peterlaws.co.uk, and you can, if you sign up for the newsletter there, you'll get a free little book about my journey as a freaky person, and then you can cancel it straight after. But yeah, peterlaws.co.uk, you'll find me there. Or if you want to get more like sort of connected with me, then the patreon.com/peterlaws is a place where we have a kind of smallish community, like 50 odd people, and they support the stuff I do, but then they get access to loads of extra things. And we do things like Zoom discussions. Like this Sunday, we're doing a Zoom discussion on sleep, dreams, and nightmares. And the patrons this week are recording their dreams and nightmares so that we can try and figure out what they're all about. So you can always check that out. But if you Google Peter Laws, you'll find me.
Fantastic. And again, all of these links will be in the description of the video if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening on Spotify and Apple and all those other places. That will all be there as well. But yeah, so again, Peter, thanks for coming, and
Thank
everyone,
you.
thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week. Have a good one.
The Secret Circle.